Hi, I'm David Bolger. I'm the artistic director of Cushcame Dance Theatre, and I also direct and choreograph, and I'm looking up to be a movement director. And recently, I've been making some film and writing some film. So yeah, I feel like I've come from a, a varied background.
Yeah, it's funny, kind of, because obviously knowing you, I've known your work for a long, long time, but kind of in prepping to talk to you, I was kind of, you look and kind of go, God Almighty, there's what a wealth of different arenas you found yourself in, and very, very interesting people. But we'll get to that. But first
Yeah.
of all, I have to ask my stock question about you as a young lad. Were you always dancing? Was it kind of dance? Was dancing your bones?
Um, when I look back, I think it was at times, I can look back and like anyone can look back and go, yeah, there was definitely dancing in there and in my blood. And, I used to follow my sisters to dance classes. They used to take local tap classes. And I'd kind of follow them, and boys weren't allowed to go to the class for some reason, but eventually I kind of got in. But I think my big introduction actually to performance and performance art and the kind of talent and skill required was the circus, actually, as far as I remember. When the circus would come, I was fascinated with the idea of these traveling exotic people coming to a town and pitching up and entertaining, and then the next day they're gone. There was something so magical about that, but yet kind of knowing the degree of difficulty that they had in their skills. Like I'd go home and I remember putting up a tight or trapeze in my house. I nailed these 6-inch nails over a door frame and hid the swing up above the door frame in my bedroom and made a trapeze, and taught myself how to kind of hang back and swing from my legs and do all those kind of things, that I remembered seeing in the circus. And that kind of was cut short when I was caught. My mother caught me and saw the holes in the walls that I put in. Sorry, Mom. And I suppose they knew that I was kind of slightly, obsessed with the exoticness of performance. So I kind of, I wasn't sure whether that was available to me at the time, so dancing then, I suppose, was another way, like following my sisters to the dance class and managing then to get into the dance class, and then going through that. And actually, my sisters left the dance class, and I stayed in the dance class, in the local class, with Rita Keeley, who was an ex Royalette. And so she had all that history of the Theatre Royal, and so I learned kind of a love for, and knowing that the Theatre Royal was pulled down, I learned a kind of a real passion for theatre. And again, that notion of something there and then something disappearing, and to think of a big building like Theatre Royal, being pulled down was now I look at it and go, God, what a crime. But the idea of I suppose performance, no matter what it was, like I went to the Brendan Smith Academy as well when I was about 14, I think. For every Saturday I'd go to that, and then I went to singing lessons. Then I kept dancing, went through school, and by the time I was around 16 years of age, we were on a drive in the car, and my dad asked me what should I want to do with my life. And I mean, it just spurted out. I want to be a dancer, and thinking that you can't be a dancer, or you got to do something else, or you've got to. And he didn't. He said, well, if you want to be a dancer, you have to learn classical ballet, because all the great dancers have classical ballet. Look at Fred Astaire, look at Gene Kelly, all the people that we'd seen in the movies. And kind of was shocked, because the thoughts of doing ballet at that point, I wanted to be free and express myself. And anyway, enrolled into a dance class in the National College of Dance, which was run by Dublin City Ballet at the time. And I went for a summer kind of intensive course, and I learned Martha Graham technique. And I went to a kind of a jazz class with Anne Ortney, who was teaching American jazz. And then I started to do ballet with Yvonne Wells. And because I was a boy at 16, you know, it's tough. At 16 years of age, you're kind of, the bones are kind of set, and ballet is a very strenuous art form. But I went into it, and they whipped me up because I was male and said, "Oh, I would like you to do the master class." And like an idiot, I went, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do the master class." And went in, and with all these people that had kind of been doing ballet maybe since they were, you know, 6 years of age, and suddenly I was in the middle of them in the bar, you know, not being able to get my leg in the bar and being really embarrassed about everything, but really finding it like I really had to do it at that point because I was enrolled, and because I decided to do it, I just went, I'm going to crack this. And Yvonne Wells was my teacher at the time, and she was just incredibly patient with me. And what was brilliant about her was she not only did she teach the classical ballet, she also taught a tap class on a Monday. So tap I was really kind of more comfortable with. So I felt like it started the week of my dance training with the tap class, which was great. So I got the tap, and then I'd have the rest of the week with ballet class. And so I kept at that for several years. Again, I was just lucky that I kind of met great teachers. I met some great choreographers. I really had a kind of fast track into dance, and I suppose I had a natural ability to dance maybe that they saw. But when I started taking contemporary class, I realized, yes, you need the technique and you need that kind of strict discipline, but also contemporary, I don't know, I was more attracted to it some way because it felt you could express yourself maybe a bit more, or it wasn't just being taught steps or to recreate the steps. It was kind of to think about the choreographic structures of things. And I kind of liked that idea, or like that area more. And then realized maybe much later on in my career, you know, all the little things that I'd learned along the way about singing and acting and dancing and trapeze and circus and traveling, I wanted to kind of include all of that material, that became kind of valuable to me, where it wasn't something to be looked down on. So in a way, I suppose I tried to bring that into the work I do. But one of the big things that happened to me actually was when I was leaving school. So I used to go to school with my dance tights in my bag and hide them, because a lot of the school would do a lot of sports, and I was a swimmer, which was fine. So I got away with the sports by swimming. But also after school, I would go straight to ballet class. So I'd have to bring all my gear and go from school, and I'd kind of hide the the shoes and everything into the bag, and get dart out to Blackrock and go to ballet class training out straight after school for several hours. And it was only kind of at the very end, when I was leaving school, I wanted to leave school actually quite early because I wanted to train full time when I was 16. You know, once I started all that, I went, oh yeah, I've got to throw myself into that. And I kind of tried to broach that idea with my parents, and they said, no way, you've got to continue your schooling. So I kind of understood that in the sense. I'm so glad that happened now, that I finished up to my leaving cert. But we had a kind of a drama society in the school, and we used to do musicals with the local girls' schools. So it was Marion College and St. Mary's in Haddington Road, and they'd come together and do musicals. And because I was able to dance, I would always get roles in the show. So I became kind of, was able to talk about me dancing, because everyone could see the fact that something was positive was coming out of it. And of course, you know, you always had if you had the lead role, you'd have to fall in love with the lead girl, and you know, there was all that kind of stuff in school. But it was at the very end of school when they had an award for a student that was very active in the performing arts, and it was called the Liguri Award, which was after, I think it was a brother Liguri who had set up the kind of musical society or drama society. And at the time, Noel Pearson, the producer, he was a past pupil actually of the school, and they got him to interview about 5 of us that was nominated for this Liguri Award. And I went in to meet Noel Pearson after school. We were all interviewed, we were all waiting, and I went in and I met Noel, and he asked me what I was doing, and I said, you know, I'm dancing. And he asked me who I was dancing with, and I said who I was dancing with. And I said, Annie Courtney. And he said, oh, I know Anne Courtney. But what do you want to do when you leave school? And I said, I want to be a dancer. And he said, oh, come on. What do you really want to do when you leave school? I said, no, I want to be a dancer. He said, what's the point in being a dancer? There's no work for a dancer. You can't, it's a really hard life. There's no way you're going to make it. You know, he really kind of put it up to me. And I got so mad, and I said, well, heck you, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I thought, feck the award, feck everything. And I kind of stormed out, and well, not stormed out, but I kind of walked out on the interview, and just to put my hand in the door, he said, wait. He said, that's really interesting. He said, I'm auditioning for a musical in the Gaiety Theatre called HMS Pinafore. I'd like you to come in and meet Mavis Ascot, the choreographer, and Earl Gill, the musical director, and I'd like you to audition. So I went, sure, I'll audition. So a few weeks later, I went in, he set up an audition. I went in and met Mavis Ascot, who was choreographing the show, and Arthur Breen was actually directing, as far as I remember, and Earl Gill was the musical director, and went into the Gaiety Theatre and stood on my own with Mavis Ascot and Pat Conway, the assistant choreographer, and was given an audition. And I don't know how I did, but I was on my own, so I couldn't really judge. And it was kind of choreography I'd never really experienced before. She kind of had a very character way of moving, and quite funny, quite a lot of storytelling in her movement. And anyway, so she called me up to the bar, and I got a role in the show.
Wow.
And so I went straight from school. I went straight from literally closing the exam paper, my last exam in the Leaving Cert. I went straight up to a rehearsal room to be in Pinafore. John Kavanagh was in it, and the great Anita Reeves was in it, and just a host of really brilliant artists that I just learned so much from. And Mavis Ascot herself was incredible. But that show became quite infamous or famous. So it ran in the Gate for the whole summer, and Alan Devlin, the brilliant actor, Alan Devlin, was in the show. And one evening he was, as they put it in the publicity, he was tired and emotional, and he walked off stage. I don't know if you remember it. And there's plenty of stories around it, and it's funny, I hear the stories back, but I actually then have to tell people, I was actually on stage. I know exactly what happened. And anyway, kind of cut a long story short, that show then became front page news of a lot of newspapers, particularly in England. And actually, there was a front page in a Japanese newspaper about this story, about an actor walking off live on stage. And subsequently, the show then was invited on a UK tour, and then went to the Old Vic in London. So I was incredibly fortunate for my first show to be among these amazing people, and then to suddenly go from the Gaiety Theatre to the UK tour, and then end up in the Old Vic in the West End in London. So, I mean,
it's interesting. You kind of that nearly is a microcosm in some way for your career. You know,
yeah,
that amount of kind of, you know, diverse. But I mean, were you bitten? Was it kind of when you were in that show, were you kind of going, "Oh Jesus, this is."
Definitely. I mean, what I realized about that show was tough, you know, because you had the triple threats, as it were. You had to sing, dance, and act, and do acrobatics, and do rope tricks. And, you know, the health and safety wasn't quite what it is today. So we were doing stunts that were, I'm sure now you wouldn't be allowed, but like, it was a tough show. Now, I was 18, so, you know, my body was capable of taking the impact of 8 shows a week. And, you know, having to do, you know, the show is, you know, whatever, 2 hours, 2.5 hours long. So that training was incredibly, that was an incredible training, because Mavis, the choreographer, she was tough. She came from a tough world, you know, in showbiz tough, you know. And I just remember learning so much on that show. And when I got to London then, I decided to kind of go back maybe to a bit more serious dancing, as it were. And I started to look around at contemporary dance artists in London. And at the time, there was Michael Clark, there was Matthew Hawkins, there was kind of a rake of people really big in the scene in London, as happens, you know. And I remember taking class at some of them, really being opened up to a lot, being introduced to, you know, the work of DV8, being introduced to the work of Frantic Assembly, you know, being able to kind of be in London at a time when these companies were coming up and seeing what was happening was very exciting, you know. That was kind of 87, 88, 89. You know, and then I got really homesick actually in London and decided I would have to move back to Dublin for a while and just see what would happen, and not thinking I would get any more work here. And ended up kind of doing some commercial work, and then started working with John Scott, Irish Modern Dance Theatre, working with Rabata Ballet, working with Dublin City Ballet, doing some TV work, doing some live TV work. It was an incredible time to be a dancer at that point, you know, in a way when now a lot of the dancers don't think get to do live TV or know what that adrenaline rush is like, or what it's like to go from maybe a commercial one week to being a, you know, serious contemporary dancer in the old project with buckets on the floor with drips, and you know, like that was such an extraordinary time with extraordinary people, and there is now extraordinary people and extraordinary times, but it felt like everybody did everything at that point. Everyone, we didn't feel like you were as pigeonholed or something. I think people tend to maybe pigeonhole you a bit more now, I think, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think that's just a way of people just understanding what kind of art you might be interested in making, or what kind of a maker you are.
But certainly, I mean, certainly, you know, back in those days, the contemporary dance scene in Dublin and Ireland wasn't, you know, it was small. I mean, you know,
that's right.
It's kind of, so I think that, you know, one had to, as you say, be diverse around. It was only kind of when John Scott, you know, was a huge trailblazer kind of in that area. But I think there's a kind of, it was also sat very close to the entertainment broadly in industry. You know, you mentioned live television, or, you know, the Gaiety, or it was kind of, there was a real segue between live and entertainment and high contemporary art, which is kind of really fascinating.
Well, I mean, you know, I remember I did a whole season with Anne Courtney, who I've mentioned, from Dublin City Ballet. And actually I was a member of Dublin City Ballet that used to do live at the Olympia every Sunday, which was a variety program. It was kind of formulaic. It had an opening number that the dancers presented, and then, you know, there was a comedian, and then there was a specialty act, and then there was kind of a musical interlude. It might have been from a musical. But I mean, they were being choreographed by, you know, like Anne Courtney was you know, a contemporary choreographer. Again, Mavis Ascot, I worked on that program. There was plenty of people around. It just, I don't know, it seemed like there was maybe a bit more communication between those two things. Maybe, I think there was probably more live entertainment at that point than there is now. And I mean that on TV rather than a pre-record, or, you know, maybe it's changing now with the talent shows and Britain's Got Talent and that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, and could we, David, I mean, like, you know, there was, I mean, the journey from that point of returning to Ireland and doing that kind of eclectic work in a very kind of, you say, bubbling time, the journey from there to kind of Cush Gang, like what, you know, what, I mean, there's one thing doing it, but then setting up something to do it, you know, to, that's an interesting part. Well, you know.
I had a great opportunity. I submitted to do a small piece, which I suppose everyone starts with, and it was in a festival called New Music, New Dance, and it was part of the Project Art Centre's program. It was run actually, I think, by the Dance Council of Ireland at the time. And the premise basically was that you would apply to perform or present work. It had to be new work in this festival. And you also had to have new compositions. So it kind of required you to work with a composer and also on a new composition, and required you to put a new piece of choreography. So in a way, this was more training ground, because I decided I was kind of interested in the work of Charlie Chaplin. So I decided naively, probably, I decided I was going to make a piece about Charlie Chaplin and his life and his disgrace from Hollywood. And so I made a piece called Silent Screen, or I applied to do it. And they accepted it, actually, and I was taken in as a lunchtime performance for 2 or 3 performances of it. And I decided to put a band together for it, or a 3-piece, and decided to make a work that had 4 characters in it that was done like kind of a silent film, a backstage kind of dance piece about the politics of Chaplin and his eventual disgrace from Hollywood, and how, I suppose at the time I thought, well, Hollywood has turned its back on him, and then, you know, you subsequently go back into his life and you think, no, it's a lot more complex than that. But I think at the time, for 20-minute lunchtime piece, I had to bite off as much as I could chew. So I did that, and actually that was quite successful in the sense that it got a lot of, not a lot of attention, but it got attention because it made people laugh, it made people think. I ended up playing Chaplin in it, so I studied his movement for months, just watching how he moved. And how, I mean, I would never do that now when I think of it. I think when you're younger, you'd chance anything. Oh yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I can play Chaplin, no problem. I just put on a moustache, do that, you know. And you know, you can kind of jump into things, where I think as you get older, you start to go, oh, I'm not sure, or you know, you put a lot of barriers in your way. So we jumped in, and so that was kind of the first piece that I made as a choreographer, from, you know, complete conceptual seed to kind of fruition of what it was. And I was kind of bitten by the bug of that. I kind of thought, oh, maybe I have something to say, and maybe I can bring in all the vaudeville tricks that I found, and maybe I'll, you know. And then actually the second piece I made was completely different. I decided to make solo, and a brilliant artist, Mary Lally, took part in that, and she and we got together with one musician, and I decided to make kind of a solo with one musician on stage, and that it was called Mermaid, actually, and it was okay. It kind of wandered a bit because I don't think I had a kind of very clear thing. So I learned something from that. And then eventually, sorry, this is leading to me then wanting to set up a kind of a system, or a group, or I didn't know what it was. I suppose it's company, to be able to do work and to explore work longer, to not just kind of bash something out and then move on, you know, to try and set up some kind of parameter that you could make work in. And I think that's how, in a way, Kush Game was born from that. And we ended up doing our first show was in Dance Time Festival in Belfast at the Old Museum Art Centre, and we did three short pieces for that. So I was able to kind of do 3 pieces for that. So I kept at the short kind of format, the kind of 20-minute short thing, and then decided to put something in my head long term. And there was a commemoration of the famine happening or coming up, and I remember thinking about just the famine and what it meant to me. And I remember researching it and realizing how little I really knew about it. Like it actually shocked me so much that I'd been through schooling and stuff, and didn't realize like the extent that the famine has and the effect it still has on us, you know, many generations later. And I started to try to prepare to do a work that might embrace that idea of knowledge or history through the body, or history. I probably couldn't have put it to words so much what I wanted to do, but I spent about 3 years doing that piece, and it ended up being called Ballads. And I had a great group of dancers, a great group of artists. We workshopped for on and off, you know, for 2 years. the Abbey Theatre at the time let us use the stage, use some of the Abbey company. Like I really tried to spread wide the net on that until the piece started to form around, or be informed from all the research and experiments that we had made over 2 to 3 years. And anyway, we premiered Ballads, and that then became kind of a piece where people probably looked at the work that I was willing to go into something that was a bit more, that had a depth in it, or a soul, or I don't know how to probably describe that aspect, but that was a really great learning curve for me, because up to that point I kind of made pieces that were funny, that made people laugh out loud maybe, and funny, making people laugh is very, very difficult, as I'm sure most people, or you would realize, that actually is a very difficult thing, but can come across sometimes as maybe easy. and good, then going into something that was exploring, I suppose, more in what's in our bodies, and what's in our bellies, and what's in our soul, and what do we feel about this history. So I really enjoyed making that work, because I felt that really taught me a lot, and it also taught me how to research, I think, or at least started the process of that idea of research, and how important research is, and how important the kind of longevity of that research is, and that how sometimes you have to put everything on the table and just look at it and go, oh my God, this is chaos of everything on the table, but then slowly maybe take things off the table and see what's there. So although what I probably would say is, going into something not knowing what you want is okay, but knowing what you don't want maybe is better than knowing what you want, or having that kind of those parameters. So
I mean, that's actually, let's stick with Kush Game for a minute.
Sure.
Because we will get kind of go down rabbit holes on the kind of the other stuff. But you look at the 25 years, which is kind of really scary and hard to kind of fathom. I can only, it's scary.
I know.
Generation now, so we're kind of got to all happen. But the trajectory of the company and your work in it. I mean, obviously, we're not going to have time to go through each and every single of them.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But the sense of your exploration, let's say, and working with, say, obviously there's people and dancers that have been with you on and off throughout it all, or some have kind of dipped in and out. But also then the sense of what the company is about, and kind of the huge broad reach, the huge stuff. And I suppose, in a sense, at the beginning, following one's nose and kind of wanting to kind of do work that interested you. When did you find, when things start taking off, when the Rolling Stone starts gathering moss, when you're kind of going?
Yeah. Well, I met Bridget Webster, who is now our executive producer, and I've worked on and off with her for 25 years. And I met Bridget because I was going to Belfast. I'd kind of over sugared the truth when I went to Belfast, because I told them that I had an evenings program, and would you please program us, and here's the video of one piece, but I have 2 other pieces and they're great, and we're going to do 3 pieces for you, and it's going to be the launch of Kush Game. And lo and behold, they said, we'll give you a slot in the Dance Time Festival, and here are the dates. And I came back to Dublin and I went, oh shit, I don't know how to do any of this. Like, the only thing I can do is maybe organize the dancers getting to rehearsal, but how am I going to, I don't know anything about money, or I don't know anything about, I just don't know those things. I don't know, that's not my bag. And one day I met Bridget, who is a friend of a friend, and we were chatting away, and she had just worked on a visual art project, and she's actually a petroleum oil engineer who is very interested in the not-for-profit sector, and is very interested in art. And she had just created a visual art project, and I just said, oh, I'm just really worried. And she said, look, if I can help you, I will. And here's my phone number. Well, she'd only gone out the door and I was phoning her saying, yes, I'd love to help. Thank you. And basically, I think that was probably the biggest thing that happened was the two of our relationship. And she saw some of the work and she believed it. And then she was able to look after producing side and I was able to look after the artistic side. And I think that's the relationship that we have had for almost 25 years. And that was a major catalyst in us establishing Cush Came, and you know what we wanted from Cush Came, or what the company might be, and what it might do, and what it might serve, and how it might be, and just dreaming and being able to dream, and at the time we didn't, you know, we had very little money and stuff, so actually all we had was our imagination and our dreams, and that was great, because then you can dream up anything, where when you start putting budgets and things, you know, you cap things. So we did Dance Time Festival, and then we got a small grant from the Arts Council to actually produce a new work in New Music New Dance Festival. So I'd gone on from a 20-minute kind of piece to 40-minute piece. So now I was kind of building the length of how I could probably hold the stage if I thought, when I think back. And so we got a small grant, and then the following, we got some critical success with that, which was good. And then we had plans. So what we did was we had a 3-year plan, and then we did a 5-year kind of looser 5-year plan, but with a 3-year plan. So the fact that I suppose Bridget had taught me to have a plan, to have a longer term plan, and to also put in the research into that, and put in, so that you're not just you're working on one project, but actually other projects are, you know, you get attracted to other energies and other projects. And also the other thing that happened, like it was just a really small thing. What tends to happen when you're a dance company, you go to quite brilliantly, they want more than the performance. They want a workshop, or they want a talk, which is brilliant. And I love that. And that this is really important. But one of the things that quite slightly disturbed me was that I believe that, like if you're teaching workshops, firstly, I think you have to have experience in doing them and doing them in some way. And I also think, sorry, just see something. I also think that sometimes the dancers performing the show are not best to serve the workshop or the outreach in that. So outreach started to become important, but as a kind of a parallel program with me, and about access, because one of the things I really wanted to do, that I remember that I wanted in my head, was I wanted people to be able to come and see the show and to hopefully make a decision about it, whether they liked it or didn't like it, or understood it or didn't understand it, or ask questions or not ask questions, or, you know, to have some way of being, to have a contact point in that. So we slowly kind of tried to build a participation program that would run in parallel with the performance program, but would be able to take subject matters that we were dealing with in the studio and then run with them in an outreach kind of in a way. And then if this was kind of an audience development engagement, how that engagement how we might meet together, and how we might be able to converse after the show, beyond I enjoyed the show, to be able to be critics, or to be able to respond to what they like. So in a way, that was always kind of there in my thinking for the company, and still is to this day. And you know, we've had some pretty big projects in yeah.
I mean, you have. I mean, I think that's, you know, both, and it's one company, but both sides that have kind of, you know, both aesthetically and, you know, strategically kind of, you know, being very much at the forefront of a lot of things over the years. But I mean, for yourself, excuse me, like within a very short space of time, you know, your work was getting very hugely critically acclaimed. There was tour, you know, there was kind of stuff that was being toured, and then also, you know, you were being asked to do other stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I jokingly said before, you know, I was at a small part in Colleen Ball in the Abbey years ago, and you previously worked
yes Yeah.
Harry Flynn. I mean, that was a very different world. I mean, a world probably you hadn't inhabited in a guise before, you know,
Yeah.
So I suppose, how was that like to kind of go back into that world?
Well, I really believe that we learn a lot from doing other projects and working with other people. So, like you mentioned the Colleen Bond there, and before, I think a year before that or 2 years before that, I choreographed Terry Flynn for Conor Morrison. So, like working with Conor was incredible because he's an incredible energy and incredible talent and great knowledge and great passion, and I love being in the room. Like I'm kind of lucky to be able to be in a room with somebody like Connell and then go back into the studio on my own and maybe remember that energy that I learned, because like you're learning all the time. Or, you know, again, like Colin Bond and Terry Flynn went to London, and actually I ended up meeting Trevor Nunn in London, and he subsequently, after seeing the work, asked me would I work at the National. And I worked as choreographer, movement director there for several and pretty big productions in the Olivier. Like I did, you know, like the Cozy Utopia, the big Tom Stoppard piece, for example. I mean, and that was like 3 months of your life locked into a room in the basement with Trevor Nunn in the National, and you know, Tom Stoppard coming in, and like those, you know, you just got to grab those when they're there, because you just learn so much. And you know, I'm incredibly fortunate to be able to do that. You know, there's lots of things I don't do. There's been lots of things I've been asked to do that I couldn't, unfortunately. And there's lots of things that come along and just go, no, I have to focus on this particular thing. And particularly, I think as you get older, I was talking about when you're younger, but as you get older, I think you start to kind of get, the fear starts to set in. You go, no, I need a bit more time on that. So, you know, but I'm incredibly fortunate on that.
Just to bring it back there, though. I mean, you mentioned, but there was a time, and a lot of people kind of speak to that were kind of, say, emerging or starting around the late 80s, early 90s, early to mid 90s. There was an energy in kind of, you know, the fringe was kind of starting.
Yeah.
Like Connell is, but I mean, Harry Flynn was probably one of the clearest expositions of that new form of Irish theatre, let's say. That's what we've been.
Yeah.
But that sense of an explosion of young talent onto the stage, you know, an explosion of this, you know, book which would have been well known, maybe not well read, you know, in
yeah.
And it was an I can still remember that show, an extraordinary piece of work, but also an explosion of a new role maybe in theatre that was kind of yet to be formed, and kind of, I think you've been at the forefront of that over the last kind of 20 years, and that kind of, not a choreographer, not a movement director, an associate director, what the hell, you know,
yeah.
But I think that was really, you know, that was very much there in that.
Well, like, for example, Terry Flynn was like, there was equal emphasis put on the movement as there was in the text, for example. You know, like there really was, like there wasn't kind of like, oh, well, here's the actors and here's the dancers and here, like it really was about like everybody being part of this physical text and this physical world. So like that was an extraordinary thing for me to learn. You know, I kind of really got that, and Connell's emphasis on that storytelling and wanting it to have that physicality was brilliant, you know. And then even like work with Druid sometimes, and with Gary Hines, and like she's incredibly, you know, obviously to serve the text, but we're always looking at ways of physicalizing the play, and how do you move it. And sometimes you might physicalize it too far and go into the extreme and then pull it back. And I think you have to go there in order to maybe pull it back. And when you pull it back, you're in another place that you wouldn't have been if you hadn't have gone to the furthest extreme. I remember working with Aaron Monaghan. I can't remember who the actor, I'll think of it in a second. We were working on a scene in Playboy, and it was so Peggy and himself are left alone for a second. And I remember saying to them, look, I know you can say the text, it's brilliant, but can we do this scene without the text? Like let's do the text, but let's do it all physically. And, you know, I was kind of nervous kind of introducing that, you know, you just, because you get nervous, but they were brilliant. They just took it on and did it, and then ended up then putting the text back in, and then deciding, well, we couldn't cut the text, so we could cut some of the movement down, but we kept some of the movement that was commenting further on what maybe the writer had said, or maybe said something just slightly that was indicating something else that was about to happen. So I love when that happens, when you because I work, you know, with Kush Game, but, you know, sometimes I will start with a piece of text, or I'll ask the dancers maybe to write about a story or a subject matter that they can relate to, that we're working on, or you know, how do you really deeply understand what you're trying to say? And when we can deeply understand it, then we can deeply convey it, you know, hopefully, and touch people. And that's that thing about communication.
But it's the same thing. I mean, it's a different form, you know, different form maybe of expression or performance. But I mean, again, you know, we are going to bounce all over the place. But
I know, sorry.
It's great, it was perfect. But I mean, that leads me to say, you know, you as an opera director, and I think
Yeah.
a sense of, you know, and a most beautiful production, you know, and I think that. I'm sorry, not you've directed loads of. I'm talking about the
Orfeo. Yeah.
I think that sense as well of, you know, you speak very much like a director there when you're talking. Do you know what I mean? So it's the same.
Yeah.
Choreographer, you know, whatever, stage director, you know, musical assistant, whatever it is. It's the same thing about making someone feel and express.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, I suppose in that way, like Orfeo, that was Opera Ireland, and Dieter Kagi asked me to direct the opera, and I remember I nearly said no, actually, because I was so terrified. Because what do I know about opera? Like, I danced in 2 operas. One of them was Traviata, you know, and one of them was the Parafishers. I mean, you know, and suddenly he was asking me to do an opera that I'd never heard of. I was like, what's Orfeo? I don't know. So anyway, I got into it and researched it, and thankfully, you know, I said yes. But I worked with, I mean, the biggest, and I've got to mention one of the best thing that happened in my career was meeting Monica Frawley, the designer. And Monica, who sadly passed away early in the year, but she was an incredible force, and I managed to scoop up the courage to ask Monica to design the opera. And I remember being terrified of Monica because I'd seen her work, and I think I might have worked with her once, but probably not forgot about it, but just wouldn't dare to kind of talk to her, because she was such an artist, and she was so larger than life, and a big, beautiful soul. And anyway, I rang her up and asked her, would she consider, I was like, would you consider working with me on Orfeo? And she said yes. And she came on board, and we just had such a great time designing, because I suppose with lots of theatre, but particularly with opera, I think design it's quite important to know what take you're going to make in this, because you're dealing with operas, you know, unless it's a modern opera, but most, you know, this is a Baroque opera. You know, how do you do Baroque to a modern audience? How do you get them to understand what this myth is? And she came up with a great concept about him being you know, because he's a famous musician, and goes into the underworld. And we came up with the concept that it was, you know, somebody like Bono who was caught in his apartment and just didn't get out. And instead of him going to the underworld came to him. And that was kind of part of our premise with that. And then we were lucky enough to have a brilliant cast of singers and a brilliant chorus in that, and just everyone was up for moving. I remember just thinking, and I remember my first day saying to the singers, look, I am not going to interfere with the score of this opera, and I will protect and do my utmost to protect all of how you sing, how we present the opera vocally. I will not get in the way of the music. However, I do want you to try everything. And when I put you into positions, and when I try to do things, and when we improvise things, I want you to think of those notes that you're singing. So I try to come at it from how a singer might want to think through an opera. And I think I probably won some favors maybe saying that. And so, you know, you built up a trust and decided that there was a way forward. So I ended up then subsequently directing 2 operas for Opera Ireland after that, Midsummer Night's Dream and I did I was the other, God, so long ago, and I actually ended up working on Sophie's Choice at the Royal Opera House. I did the Traviata in E&O. I've done several operas in Spoleto Festival. And you know, just I love opera. I wouldn't want to do. I think I would love to do an opera once every 2 years or something, because it requires so much of your. Well, every piece you do requires so much, because opera is so specific and there's such a scale to it, and you have to do so much homework. Like you'd be preparing an opera for a year before you'd even go into stage it. You know, it's that precise, and because rehearsals are so short, you know, most of the time you get 2 weeks rehearsals, and you're on to stage and orchestra rehearsals, you know, so you have 2 weeks with the singers, and so you've got to know what you're doing, you know. So in a way you have to work out the grid, to work it out on I work it out on the table. I put a lot of pieces on the table and move them around and kind of try to visualize it. So that's why I wanted to bring back with Monica. What was great about doing my first opera with Monica was we were able to really get behind it and get the design and get the story, and then fit it into the space, and then be able to kind of deliver it to the singers. So
I mean, that's
yeah, that was joyous.
incredible. I mean, you mentioned there, you know, and also, I mean, not that it matters, but you know, the critical acclaim. Well, sorry, it matters obviously that these aren't panned and people walk out of them, but I think your work with Opera Prime was critically acclaimed, and also, you know, award nominees and winning and stuff. But then also, you mentioned, you know, in passing, you know, working on the world premiere of Sophie's Choice with Trevor. I mean,
I know, that was terrifying. So Nicholas Maw was the writer of that, and Trevor Nunn was directing it, and Sir Simon Rattle was conducting it. I mean, like, talk about like this little kid who loves the circus suddenly find himself in Covent Garden in these huge rehearsal rooms with huge sets being driven on and off, and just like terrified. I used to go home terrified and have to come in and put a brave face on. But so I choreographed that, and it was a world premiere. But actually, the interesting thing about that show was we never saw a full run through of the show. We saw a full run through, but in the rehearsal, we had one of the lifts at the very end of the show used to come from the floor, and then it'd have to sink down. And for some reason, it never worked. It just jammed. And even at the dress rehearsal, the final dress rehearsal, the show had to be abandoned. It was banned. So on premiere night, on opening night, we had never seen the entire opera. We had never rehearsed a curtain call, literally just posted up what people had. I mean, it was crazy, but thankfully, it happened and it worked, and it was one of those that'd be all right in the night. And but it was pretty touch and go. It was hairy stuff, you know, but brilliant, and you know, brilliant being at this side of it, and looking back and going, you know, like, because I think we all stress so much, you know, and I really think that that's actually something, and this is for whatever you do, in whatever work you do. One of the biggest, the awful things in our lives is stress, and you know, obviously we're in very stressful times, but you know, and I think that's the one thing that keeps bringing me back to dance, because once I'm dancing I don't stress.
Well, it's funny, I mean, you know, and again, jumping way forward, recently the most beautiful piece you put up online from the Parting Dance, from about the moving grace. You know, it's funny because it's we've all moved house. We've all sometimes moved office, we've moved job. And moving is one of the most stressful things one can do.
Yeah.
And to move in the midst of, you know, the world in
pandemic.
But just what you captured there, it was just gorgeous. But I think it goes to the heart. What was interesting me about your work in Kush Game is your palette can be, you know, opening ceremonies to you and your mother, and the same grace, specificity, and intimacy actually can be in those. I mean, do you find? I mean, how do you approach something like the opening ceremony of Special Olympics, and you know, other major events like that? you know, is it a completely different skill set, headspace, or is it, do you have, you know, how do you have that focus of ignoring all the moving parts that you're not part of?
Sure. Well, the Special Olympics was the first time I'd ever worked on a big scale like that, where, you know, I think there were, in the section that I was choreographing, actually with Myrna Bloomer, the two of us worked on a piece called the Splash of Color, and then I think we did one other piece in the thing. But Rupert Murray at the time was the creative director, and he asked me would I work on it, and I went, Rupert, I know nothing about working on spectacle. I know absolutely nothing. And he said to me, and he said very wise words to me, probably wise. He said, look, he said, I was never a creative director of big spectacles until I was asked, and I said yes, and I did it once, and now I'm an expert. And I went, wow, what a thing to say. So I said yes, and it was the opening was actually was a really nice concept. There was host hands for the Special Olympics, and what they wanted to do was to include the host towns in the opening ceremony, but performing in it. And they could come up with the idea of a piece called A Splash of Color, which basically had the rainbow flag. And we filled the entire stadium. And again, it was Monica Frawley actually that did this. She made flags. And you see the iconic imagery. It's all her, the rainbow flags all over the stadium. And then we worked with 250 performers from the host towns to animate the not only the stage but the whole arena. So we worked on that and did it and really enjoyed it. It was hard work, and you know, a lot of people gave up their time. There was a lot of performance in that. You know, everyone was so generous. Actually, it was brilliant about that was the generosity about that, and which is always extraordinary how generous people are. And you know, if it's the right cause and the right thing, people they just say yes and they'll do anything. So actually, in that way, being my first time working on a big spectacle, because a lot of people were volunteering,
Yeah.
they really brought themselves to the table. So all I had to do was bring myself completely to the table, keep my head, keep calm, and just know what it is I'm doing, and then do it. But the thing about those spectacles is not actually what you see on the space. Of course, it's part of that. But that's probably that's the tip of the iceberg. What the choreography really is all around the space. Where do people go? Where do they stay? Where do they sit? Where do they stand? How do they get into the stadium? What are they wearing? What are they not wearing? You know, all of that stuff. You have to literally choreograph that, and that's the invisible choreography. And I think that's the part maybe people don't actually see if they're not involved, and how would they? That actually is an awful lot of choreography off the performance areas that there is on. You know.
Yeah.
So.
And you did it again. I mean, like a few times since, you know, you did the Ryder Cup and you did the, you know, something. You did the Ryder Cup. You did the, you know.
Yeah, the opening of the Ryder Cup. Yeah, again, I worked with Myrna on that, and that was with Rupert actually. And unfortunately, Rupert died just before the Ryder Cup the ceremony happened. So it was an incredible achievement that he brought people together to do what they did. And we worked with Els Comedians, the Barcelona company, physical company. And Myrna Bloomer was on that, and there was some great dancers on that. So we did a piece called Intimate Details, and it was interesting that you talked about the trying to be intimate. You know, one of the things that I tried to bring to that piece was yes, it's spectacle, and sometimes spectacle can be, you know, very broad stroke brush, you know, just because of the necessity and because of the visual thing. One of the things that we really tried to bring to that was the detail, the sense of detail, and intimate details was the piece that we called. And we looked at the Book of Kells, and what we were really interested in was in the scriptures, that all the animal ornamentation and the drawings and the meanings of those and what they were and what they stood for, and the history of the Book of Kells. So we went into the research of that. Again, it's back to the research, that I wanted to make something that I really had to research and then respond to in that way. And a hurricane came. The opening ceremony was just about to be cancelled. I don't know if you remember, and brought indoors. And we thought, this is it. All of that work, all of that expense, all the fine detail. Sinead Cuthbert designed the costumes impeccably, and the detail. And we thought, I remember feeling so sad. And then at about 3 o'clock that afternoon, we were going on at 5, the clouds just opened, and we went, this is Rupert Murray looking down on us. and let's go. And we cleaned the stage, we mopped the book, we got the mops out, and we literally did it. And we had a window of about 2 hours to do it, and thankfully that happened. So it's interesting. Working outdoors is a challenge in itself. Yeah.
I mean, through all those times, and we go back to Cush Game in a second, but you know, collaboration is coming up a lot there, and the people that collaborate with.
Absolutely.
You mentioned Gary in Druid, you mentioned Connell, and you know, other directors.
Yeah.
Joe Dowling, that you've done.
Joe Dowling, yeah.
Both here and in the US, but also then, you know, you kind of spent a bit of time in the West End and on the Cameron Mackin in the big stuff as well. That was
that was born out of Terry Flynn, actually. Cameron came to see Terry Flynn. Well, he came to see Connell, but when Connell met them, he said, and I wasn't there, he said, no, they actually came to see you. So he said, anyway. Claude Michel Schonberg, who wrote Les Mis, had written Martin Guerre, and they had produced it in the West End, but they weren't completely happy with it, and wanted to kind of restructure it, and they wanted to do kind of a smaller version of it, or a more, I don't know, more intimate or something.
Yeah.
And they came to see Terry Flynn and liked the way we were storytelling in that, and invited us to collaborate with them to redo Martin Guerre at the West Yorkshire Playhouse. And then, so we did that, and in 1999, and that went on tour in the UK, and it got some really nice reviews, which is helpful to them, and nothing to do with me, helpful for the producers. And that got then invited to Guthrie Theatre, actually. Joe Dowling, as you mentioned, had seen the work and decided that he would like to do the North American premiere of that. So then I ended up doing a North American tour of that show. And again, that was incredible, because you're dealing with big commercial producers like Cameron McIntosh, you know, the vast, a world that I'm not hugely familiar with, and you have to toughen up pretty quickly now, I have to say, to assert yourself in some of those meetings. But it was great, and I learned an awful lot from it. It was probably really frustrating at times, but it was also equally rewarding. And again, I met some brilliant performers, and brilliant, actually, friends still to this day. Some of the performers I met on that, they're incredible. And again, it was that, just me working with people that could sing, dance, and act, and do everything. And, you know, can you do a backflip while you hold that sword, and, you know, do that? Oh yeah, no problem. You just go, oh my God, this is great, you know. And, you know, real huffers as well, real musical theatre performers. So I actually love musical theatre as well. Like, it's something that, like,
what you were involved in, actually, was it over with Joe, and the kind of, you mentioned HMS Pinafore right at the beginning, with choreograph, or when you movement director?
I actually ended up choreographing Pirates of Penzance for Joe and the Guthrie, and then I ended up doing HMS Pinafore, which was kind of strange, because Joe actually took over the directorship of HMS Pinafore, the one that I did in the UK. He took over the UK tour, and so I ended up working with him as a choreographer, even though he had directed the show already. So that was kind of really bizarre circle of turn of events. And then he invited me out to co-direct A Midsummer Night's Dream with him, which was brilliant, like a brilliant honor to be, you know, co-directing a Shakespeare with Joe Dowling at the Guthrie. Like, it was I think it was one of his final shows. It was in his final season as artistic director there. I mean, that was amazing. I mean, when I think of the opportunities that I've had, I just feel so honored and so lucky to have worked with so many brilliant people. And I actually just want to mention, like, my working relationship with somebody like M.O. Kane, for example, who's been a dancer with the company for nearly 20 years, or Jonathan Mitchell, who's come in and out. And I love the fact that there's kind of a core of people that I get to work with, and I'm just love being in the room with. And you know, that, and also new young dancers. And, you know, I've been using kind of looking at kind of street world, for example, or what that has, how can we mix contemporary dance and, you know, street dance, and why would street dance not belong on stage, and how can we story tell with that? And, you know, I'm interested in telling stories, and so, you know, again, I'm just feel so fortunate to be able to pick from all these things and to try and make sense of work and art and what I want to work on, you know.
Did you ever find, I mean, because that's, you know, it's not, it's a long period of time, but there's a huge amount of work in there. But also and going back to Kush Game, to kind of, you know, that journey of your own vision and your own company through the middle, was that challenging at times, or was it, you know, you felt pulled from pillar to post, or were you able to kind of ground yourself?
No, I was able to kind of I think in a weird way the schedule kind of worked, like, you know, I was able to, because we're not full-time company in the sense that you know, we are full-time, but we don't always, we're not always in performance, is what I mean. So like I was able to kind of schedule work around different work, and you know, I've had to turn down lots of brilliant, I mean, brilliant brilliant things, but you know, so be it. That's the way, and I feel fortunate to be in that position. But I really, like, my first love is Kush Game, so I completely, you know, so my first port of call is always there, and then if I can work on something else and I feel like my head can take it, or I might learn something from it, or, you know, because I think you know, I really think it's a collaborative process. Like it really is, like, from every aspect. I think theatre is hugely collaborative, and you know, I was mentioning, you know, I suppose it's hard not to mention the situation that we're in, and you know, really thinking about, I think we were talking earlier about, you know, just every single department and every aspect being affected by the fact that the theatres are closed, or I know some are opening, and I know now we've social distancing, and we're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to create a way through this, because I know so many great people that, you know, just, you know, I can't see what else we're going to do. What else are we going to do? You know, we don't know how to do anything else in a way, you know, and, you know, thankfully we are a resilient lot, and, you know, there is no business like showbiz, and we'll find a way through. Sorry to mention that, but it just feels like, I feel like I have to, because I just really, really concerned with the way, you know, the lack of understanding of what it takes to actually put something on. So that's what I mean about the collaborative form.
Yeah, I think you're right though about the kind of, and actually part of the reason for starting these chats, 4 months ago now, was kind of around the idea of a lack of kind of maybe knowledge, or not knowledge, but lack of understanding maybe among the arts, but certainly outside the arts, that the people in the arts are people too, if that makes, you know, that it's
yeah, no, that's a really important thing.
And also to make sure that it's people, not just, you know, people that are front stage and known, but also the thousands of people that are actually in even worse positions, because without events they can't work at all, like the crews, you know, the design.
Yeah absolutely.
Yeah, in relation to Kush Game, I mean, you know, the work has been extraordinary, and kind of has obviously mutated and grown, and as I mentioned, you know, working with very different partners over the year and collaborators, and obviously the Irish dance scene has kind of changed fundamentally kind of within that time as well. But, and also your work is kind of, you know, there's been accessibility has always struck me as being a really interesting word about your work in Kush Game, about trying to not necessarily water down, you know, contemporary dance practice, but actually maybe don't also water down the public's intelligence either, whether they be 5 or 6 years of age, or, you know.
Yeah,
I think that, and I suppose some of your choices have been really, really clever and interesting in relation to work you've, you know, like Peter and the Wolf, for example, you know.
Yeah.
Or even with, I mentioned before, so swimming with my mother, which is kind of,
yeah
I would imagine that had a whole different audience maybe, as well as a dance audience in there.
Yeah, it totally did. I mean, that piece is funny, that, like, that piece came about like kind of by accident. I just thought I'd ask my mother for the crack. Would she be interested? Thinking she'd say no, and she said yes. And right. And then, you know, no, I mean, that's not fully true, but then, you know, that was an extraordinary time, I have to say. Sorry, it sounds like I'm getting all upset. I'm not. That was an extraordinary time, and again, a time that I'll never forget. And spending time with my mother on stage. She's not a, she's not a professional performer. That's not her thing. Her thing was swimming. She was a professional swimming teacher. But be able to kind of tell part of her story and part of my story with her on stage together while dancing was kind of interesting, and it really hit me. When we were in Edinburgh doing the show, and there was no way to the dressing room after we finished the show. So when we took the bow, we'd have to stand behind a little curtain and kind of hide till the audience went. And I thought, oh no, I can't do that. That just drives me nuts. So I thought, you know what, why don't we just stand out at the, not at the foyer, but just as people leave, and if, just say goodbye to them. Just simple as that. The two of us there rather than hide behind a curtain. And the amount of people that would stop. Some people would stop, some people wouldn't. That's fine. It wasn't a forced meeting. It wasn't a royal command meeting, But the amount of people that went, they'd look at me and say, thanks, well done. But they'd talk a lot to my mum, and my mum was delighted, talking about the show or talking about stuff. And the amount of people that would say, I'm going straight home to ring my mother, or there was one, two people would say, like, I just don't have that relationship with my mother, and they just get really upset and would leave. My mum would run out into the foyer of the theatre and just grab them and hug them, and it was just like such an engagement with people on a deep level. When they got it, when they really, I don't mean that there was anything tricky to get, but when it really depth, you just realize, oh my God, we have a huge responsibility here. We've kind of a huge responsibility, because it did move people deeply, and as it did me, because like the honor of being on stage with my mum, and I'm still very close to my mum, thankfully. The whole COVID thing was very hard, not being able to properly visit her, as has many people. But like, we still talk about it, we still reminisce about that time, and it was such a special time. And our last actual performance was in part of Peak Performances in Montclair State University, and there's a great dance program there, and we did it on Mother's Day in there, and that was the last time we did it, which was about 4 years ago. And I kind of knew it was the last time we'd perform together on this piece. And we made a film, actually a short film called Deep End Dance, and that's there, and that still plays in festivals, which is fantastic. So that work there's still kind of some legacy there, because the live performance is finished.
And film is kind of, is that an awakening art form? But is there kind of is there an interesting kind of gain in that over the last number of years, David? It's kind of that,
Definitely, yeah. So I've worked on several films, and again, like I talked myself, I talked myself into a job, not myself. I talked them in asking me to choreograph Dancing at Lunasa, the film. This is interesting. I think I just decided when I heard they were doing it that I was going to choreograph it. Imagine putting that in your head, like the cheek. And Noel Pearson actually was producing it. And for some reason, I don't know, I met him, or Pat O'Connor came to see something I'd just done, who directed it. And I got an interview for it, and got the job. And I just thought, oh my God, is this true? Can you actually just put something in your head and it happens? Which I kind of like to believe anyway, that we're all able to change things and do things, but not all the time. So I worked on that, and I did some work on Michael Collins' movie, tiny little wall scene and that. And then we made a film with Kush Game and Saffron Films with Siobhan Burke and Kush Game. We did a piece called Hit and Run on stage, but we developed it for a film with John Komsky. So that really, really got me into thinking, wow, film and choreography and storytelling is amazing. This is just wow, So I really kind of started to watch lots of film and lots of, great filmmakers, and really interested in the idea of where it could go, and where I might fit into it or not. And then 2 years ago, I was researching a piece about the sinking of the RMS Leinster. And it was a mailboat that sunk off the coast of Kingstown in 1918 and had a huge loss of life on it, unfortunately. And it was just before the end of World War, 2 months before the end of World War One, and it was sunk by a German U-boat. But there were lots of civilians on the boat, and I was going to make, for some reason, I thought I was going to make some kind of, I don't know, dance piece or performance piece about the sinking live on stage. And I was thinking about this and worked with Yvonne Keiter, one of our dancers, and I just started to work around maybe some ideas of movement and how scenes might take place. And we went along the coast, overlooking where the sinking happened. So we along the Dublin Bay and all out in Wicklow, and just every place that we could look on to see where it happened. It started to make movement, and then kind of slowly dawned on me that this wasn't a stage show, that this might be a film. And I started to think about how I might write a film. And how I might, so I had written a film already, but I thought, now how would I write a film from this material, and how would then I direct it, and how would I cast it, and how would I represent this big event, and kind of started to work on it, and then really enjoyed the process of kind of putting a script together for this film, putting a director's hat in my head and saying, right, how am I going to shoot this, and how does a director, how do you direct a film? So it was kind of the first film I directed, and I was just bitten by that bug of like the possibilities. And again, the cast and the crew and everyone that worked on that film was incredible. And that kind of, it didn't happen by accident. I mean, I set out to do one thing, but I ended up making a short film with, and actually it's just played in the Dance and Camera Festival in the Lincoln Centre this weekend, which was great to see it among other international films. Like, it was nice to kind of have that moment. And with film, it's great because you make it and it goes on, so you forget about it and then you look at it again. So I do have a desire to make some more film, and actually we're making a film, making a duet called Christian and Cosmo, which was to shoot this year. We were to shoot it actually at the end of the summer, but we've had to put it off till next summer because it shoots in Tramore and in Dublin. And just with all the travel restrictions that we're in at the time, it was just too risky. So again, I'm just taking this time to research it a bit more. Yeah. That film is really nice. It's about two brothers that moved here from South America and had no English and used dance to integrate into the local community. So it's a kind of short dance film about their.
It's gas talking to you because you kind of you mentioned about film, hit and run, and then you kind of moved on. But I mean, you won and were nominated for some serious awards in the States back in the day for that. That film kind of.
Actually, we did. Yeah, I always forget about those.
Yeah, but also you kind of go, a little ball scene in Mike Collins. Yeah, but
yeah, I know. No, I know. I don't mean it that way. I'm incredibly. I don't know. You know what? It's funny because I've just moved into East Wall, which in the last year, and we only getting to know our neighbours now, and an odd time, during lockdown, we'd all kind of meet on the street, like just social distancing, of course, and we'd just like have a Friday night chat or just like a little thing. And it's funny, like you'd mention something, you go, what? It's just like, they kind of drop these things, like, and I remember once just like really just having the laugh going, yeah, Meryl Streep taught me how to iron my shirt. And I went, what? And anyway, the brief story of that was that on Meryl Streep obviously was in Dancing in Lunacy as was other great artists, but she's incredibly family orientated, and she snuck home one weekend. You're not allowed to travel when you're on a big film like that because of insurance. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have said that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's over and done with. No, she didn't. She had full permission to do it. And when she came back, somebody said, "Oh, did you have a great time? Did you have a great time when you got home?" She said, "Yeah, it was great. I was home seeing the kids." And she lives in Massachusetts. And she said, "Oh, it was great being home. And it was too short." But they said, "Well, what did you do?" She said, "I ironed." I said, "What?" She said, "I ironed." And we said, "No, you didn't iron." She said, "No, I love ironing it. Not love it, but like this kind of so much of a family thing." And I suppose that's what you do. You just do ordinary things. So there was a conversation about how people iron shirts, how people iron man's shirts. And she asked me how I iron my shirt. And I said, "Well, I don't know. I just put the iron in it and go up." And she said, "No, you do the collar first, then you do the cuffs first, then you do the sleeves, then you do the back, and then you do the two sides." So I always think, probably if I ever make an autobiography, it's going to be called Meryl Streep Taught Me to Iron My Shirt.
I think you should write that. I think
it's a great drop, you know.
Come here, Emma. I mean, I won't keep much longer, but I think there's, you know, you meant we kind of mentioned Druid briefly, but I think it's worth kind of landing there for it, because I mean, you know, you've been part of football will go down. You know, I mean, talk about legacies, because such they exist so much in the live moment. But I mean, that series of Druid work, extraordinary. And I say, you know, and also kind of changed an awful lot of things for Druid as well. But your involvement in that, as I say, kind of again boundaryless. It wasn't like, you know, you're choreographing this bit. It seemed to be a fundamental part of that team over many years, and that must have been very exciting to do, was it?
Absolutely, because you're asked, you know, rehearsal rooms are tough. Doing big epic stuff like that, you know, it's tough. And you know, you're asked a lot for your opinion on things, which is great, you know, and hopefully you have an answer. So, but it goes beyond movement, you know what I mean? Like, you know, there's often times where somebody might say, "Will you have a go at that?" You know, and it mightn't necessarily be movement, you know, it could be a part of a text or something. But I think it's great when you're in a room where people complement each other, and I mean that in their skills, you know, and you know, those, I don't know, I probably, those things are tough. Like I remember the Shakespeare's, the Jewish Shakespeare's, they were tough, because, you know, you kind of come up with how are you going to do battles with, you know, 5 people. Like, these are supposed to be entire battles, and also that you know, you've seen the RSC do them brilliantly with these, you know, huge epic sword fights where the actors are learning how to fence and sword fight for weeks, and you're kind of going, you know, firstly, we don't have that, nor maybe that's not the way we want to tell the story. And if we say we can't have that, well, then how can we represent it, and how can we do it? So sometimes those things, you know, by not being able to do something, is you come at it some other way. And because we're coming up from an Irish sensibility, like that, I really wanted the scenes, you know, for example, in the Henrys, to have like crowbars and like not swords, like to take away the swords and the daggers and the things, you know, to try and do that. So I suppose in that way you are asked to partake in how you are going to realize these particular scenes, and hopefully you have an answer, as I say, you know, and it's trial and error, you know, but again, it's collaboration. I really think it's collaboration from everyone, you know, and that those shows wouldn't go on without that full team and that full.
And I think what's interesting, you mentioned, I think it's cut very well actually in the documentary film about the Shakespeare's particularly. But you know, compare that to, say, and you mentioned that, you know, we talked about kind of containment and intimacy and stuff. But like around the Murphy stuff, the containment of the physical, or the, you know, the restriction of that, because that work is absolutely, you know, on a knife edge in relation to if you let one screw loose, the whole thing is going to kind of just turn into a Tarantino film. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's that sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember in with Tom. I mean, what a privilege and an honor it has been to be standing in a rehearsal room with Tom Murphy. You know, he just, what an incredible thing, you know. There's just no one like him in a way, you know. And Tom is very particular, and he's very particular in his rhythms, and he's very particular. So, you know, the rhythms of movement and rhythms in the character. And during one of the pieces we were doing, Famine, which was back to my own research in Famine, which was amazing, because I had read Tom's play when I was researching Ballads. And so it was great to be working on famine. And there's a big scene called the Relief Committee, where the Relief Committee are meeting and they're deciding what they might do to help to relieve the starving people. And Tom had written that you could hear the peasants starving, but not you could hear them starving, but you could hear them outside on the walls. And I remember suggesting to Gary, what if we brought them into the room, but the relief committee don't see them, but we steep them in slowly through the walls. And I remember saying, oh, that's a great idea, but I'll let you tell Tom that. And I was like, oh no, I have to tell Tom Murphy that we're doing it. So she kind of laughed and said nothing. And I remember Tom coming in, and we didn't say anything. I mean, I didn't say it to Tom, and Tom was great about it. And you know, it's that build-up of a relationship with people that you're able to suggest something like that, where maybe if I'd have come in as moving director on that piece, I wouldn't have probably been able to do that. But the fact that I had that relationship, and actually I'd worked on several other Tom's shows as well, you know, and always, you know, had the respect for what he was doing, and he'd had the respect for what I was doing. So there's a nice way of being, and that's the brilliant thing about mixing it up with who you're in the rehearsal room with. And that's why I like working on the work I do, and with Cush Cameron being really focused. But I also like to be able to be in the room with somebody else, because that's a brilliant thing. And then you can bring that back to your own work, you know.
Yeah. And then co-production, I mean, I think, you know, recently, you know, Intimacy Spaces and kind of a new and kind of, you know, that kind of,
yeah,
again, you know, that's, yeah, I mean, that's been very evident in your work with Cush came over the years of that kind of, you know, the contemporary dance space, and kind of trying to find ways of expressing, you know,
yeah.
I don't mean normative spaces, but like, you know, different spaces within that. But I think particularly more recently with the work with Cush came, again, from a very intimate type of work, that must have been really interesting to kind of, in that environment.
Really interesting. So I really admired Anu's work for a long time, and I loved their immediacy with an audience. Like that really attracts me anyway. Like it's always been in the back of my head about making the audience center of the work that you're making, you know. And you know, I'd seen several of their the Mantra Cycle, and they did Laundry, and they, you know. And I remember just going to Louise saying, you know, we should do something together. You know, just, it's mad the way you just plant an idea. And she said, yeah, let's talk. And we kind of talked. And then this case came up about the 32 women and the testimonies from that subsequently became these rooms. And we started to talk about maybe working together on this, and what it would be like to make this as much physical as it was text, as it was a piece of, you know, Owen Boss's artwork about, like, you know, what this could be, and that movement could really maybe support this thing that happened. And so that was a great experience, and we ended up doing it here, and then unusually in a way we ended up bringing it to London, to the Shoreditch Town Hall, which we able to revisit the show and actually take on more of the British soldiers side of the story. So that was kind of interesting. So it felt like a living work, you know, and constantly interrogating the work and constantly challenging and questioning it, and trying to live it, you know. And that I learned a lot from that. That was really interesting. And, you know, I'm hoping that we can get to do that. I'll get to do more work like that.
And
like
you kind of said you started off as part of the Arts Council, you know, the Ireland
Open Call,
1916 kind of, you know, operations, and it finished off as part of the British, you know, World War I centenary.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing.
Amazing. Yeah. And then part of the work went to Leeds, and like it was just like it was 2 years, it was 3 years actually working on that show. And it's just great, because so often you do a show and it's, you know, you get to do so many performances. If you're lucky, you get to tour, I don't know, and then it's gone. But actually having, you know, I think there was something like 132 performances of that piece, you know, and fair play to the cast, and you know, being able to do those cycles every day, because it's really emotional. That's very emotional
Yeah.
space that they're in to do. You know, it's very hard to prepare for that or to come down from that. So you know, again, again, it was a huge collaboration. And I think the key to collaboration is knowing who you are within the collaboration in a way, and being sure about who you are. Not, and I don't even mean you need to be sure, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? That's part of it. And then I think when you do that, then you can really open and listen, you know, and it's about listening and trying to be as open as much as possible, as often as possible, and not being afraid of it, you know, because there's a lot of fear around new work, and not fear, but you know, there can be, and you know, sometimes you can't describe what it is you're trying to achieve, or you know, in a sentence, or you might want to explore. So it requires a lot of trust in yourself, and then that collaboration, and hopefully the collaborators are open, and you're able to do that. Like, and we've had some great collaborations with Kush Game. You know, we had recently with Crash Ensemble and Fishamble, and we had several earlier on in our career where we worked with Gina Moxley, who wrote a piece for us. We're hopefully working with Frank McGuinness in the future. You know, so we're kind of like, it's really nice to have those things, and being able to give space to it, and breath to it, and then respond to it, you know.
Yeah, but I think you're right. But also, I think there's an awful lot that organically comes from dance, and being is a very different thing. I'd imagine, you know, being in a room. It's a collaborative art form from the word go. Do you know what I mean? It's not. It's very different to say we're going to do a rehearsal process, no matter how collaborative it is from a theatre piece. You still probably have a text or a formulate, but sometimes I imagine you going into a room with an idea and working with. That's a very different thing.
It is, and I think, you know, the performers are also developing the script with you. You know, they're developing the physical script. I mean, that's what's so great sometimes about dancers, who just trust the process, and they just go into it, and they don't worry about, you know, they just kind of launch into it. And you know, and sometimes you start on day one with just a sentence, you know, literally that, and that's can be terrifying. You know, it can be terrifying, but also very liberating.
Yeah.
And you know, I think dances are, you know, a lot of our training, most trainings, you know, got improvisations, and that improvisational skills, and being able to improvise your way out of a problem, you know, is really, really interesting, you know. And
great training
that becomes the tricks.
Great training to be a director in any shape or form, and to be able to improvise yourself out of a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, we have to do that so often, you know, or look like we know what we're talking about, you know. There's a huge responsibility in being a director, isn't there? It's like sometimes you're just going, I wish somebody else would do this, you know.
Yeah. Come here, before I finish, I just have to take it. It's kind of is a bit of a sidebar, but you mentioned about live TV, and you mentioned about, you know, back in the day and kind of the training. But also, like 4 years ago, you were, you know, the musical stager for the the big centenary concert live.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I mean, was that a moment for you, kind of going, Christ, this is, you know, this is a kind of a journey back, or a journey forward, or a journey, you know, the kind of that.
It was actually a bit of both. It was, I suppose, because I knew what to expect from live TV. So when I was casting the dancers, not only for, you know, obviously casting, I had to know that people were going to not freak with live TV, you know, because there's a lot of pressure on that. It's not nothing, and anyone that's done it will tell you it's I suppose the same as the curtain going up, but it's more because you've got this audience that you can't see, and if you feck up, that's it, you know. Or I don't know, there's something. It requires a certain amount. So yes, I definitely did put my cap on of remembering what that was like, being in, you know, in front of a camera and hearing 5, 4, and then they stop counting, they go, and they're gone, you know, and you're like, ugh. And I remember several times actually having stage fright during those live performance, and actually forgetting what the first step was, like literally forgetting, I don't know what the first step is. And then once you get it, you go into it, you know, because it's muscle memory. But just that moment where your mind just plays a trick and forgets, you know, and I'm sure actors can have it where they're just forgetting the first thing. But in the centenary concert, there was a huge team on that again, and I mean, I loved working on that. I mean, that just because, you know, I was working with dancers who I'd worked with, new dancers, commercial dancers, contemporary dancers, aerial dancers. You know, I got to choose those kind of like how we might tell the story, you know, within that. And it's huge responsibility because it's a big story. And literally, we did not know whether that show was going to work or not until afterwards. Like we really did not. We did not know how people were going to take that show. And, you know, we thought, oh, you know, this could go. And then suddenly somebody ran out to me. I was watching the show live. I couldn't get a ticket because the TV was full. And I actually think I thought I couldn't sit in a seat in the theater. I thought, no, I'd just watch it myself. And I went out, and I was in the foyer of the Board Gosh and watching a monitor in the foyer with a large gin and tonic, I must say. And it went up live, and I was watching it, and I saw one of the production assistants run down and said, Twitter's on fire, Twitter's on fire. And I had no idea. I'd never heard Twitter's on fire. I don't think I was even on Twitter at the time. And I went, what's on fire? Twitter's on fire, Twitter's on fire. I subsequently learned that like people were just tweeting how they were really enjoying the show. And, you know, there was like people were being really vocal on Twitter. And it was such a swell of pride in that moment of going, wow, we've done it, you know. And you felt like you were doing it for the country or something. It felt really like, I felt really nationalistic pride in that, you know, and it seemed so important to get it right, you know. So I was again very proud of it, and I you know, I hope we get to do things like that again, you know. We will.
I think you let you go. Even the other night, I was watching something on, I can't remember what it was, on television, but there was a scene of people having a house party, and I actually just went, holy shit, can't really do that now.
I know.
We're having artists kind of back into the building here at the moment.
Yeah.
And your first it kind of give people a hope when they're coming in. You're kind of going, you know.
Yeah. It's so strange, isn't it? The hugging thing is really strange, but it's funny how quickly you can look at a group of people like and go, oh, they're not social distancing. Like recently, you know, I'm not. Anyway, I won't say what it is, but like you're kind of, my shoulders just go up now, and it's so strange, you know, and in a choreographic way, it's so strange. Like, you know, trying to move people and be social distancing and stuff, you know. So, and you know, unfortunately, we're going to probably have to do it for a little while longer, but let's just embrace it. And it's, you know, it is our first form of defense when you think about it, and it's the best form we have at the moment. So, you know, let's keep at it.
David, thanks a million for taking part. And just
not at all.
Anyone that finds this somewhere in the deeps of definitely YouTube in years to come, we are talking, hopefully, it's summer 2020.
Yeah, what did they talk about? Yeah.
Thanks very, very, very much. It's been an absolute honor.
Not at all.
And just your work is extraordinary, and long may you continue. And anyone that hasn't checked out the piece you put out online, I'm gonna put the link in the bio for this. It's extraordinary.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a million.
Thanks very much. Not at all. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.